before you dive into this chilling tale, make sure to subscribe, because the next story might just be the one that keeps you up at night. I had served as a police officer for a decade, patrolling the streets of Ashford, Kentucky. My routine had become second nature. Start each shift with a briefing at the precinct, go over the latest updates on fugitives or recent crimes, and then hit the streets in my cruiser. Some nights were uneventful, with nothing more than a few traffic stops or the occasional noise complaint. Other nights, chaos erupted, and I'd be running from call to call until dawn. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that one particular night. Before law enforcement, I had dreams of playing professional football. In high school, I was a solid running back, praised by my coaches for my speed and determination. But a torn ACL during my senior year ended any hope of a scholarship. Eventually, I found my way into the police academy, figuring that the discipline and resilience I had developed on the field could serve me well in a different arena. Over the years, I grew to love the job, helping people, making a difference. But by 2017, after 10 years on the force, the weight of it all was beginning to wear on me. That summer, we had reports of a string of burglaries in the Maplewood district. The suspect, Anthony Warren, was a wiry man with dark hair, always seen driving a navy blue sedan. He had been slipping through our fingers for weeks, always managing to vanish just as backup closed in. That night, I was stationed near Oak Hill Cemetery, cruising down an almost deserted stretch of road, when I noticed a navy blue sedan creeping along ahead of me. The driver seemed hesitant, uncertain. The moment he caught sight of my police vehicle, he stomped on the gas. My instincts flared. I flipped on my lights and sirens. He pulled over, but something felt off. As I approached, he gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I asked for his license and registration. He hesitated before handing over his ID. Sure enough, it read, Anthony Warren. My mind snapped back to the morning briefing. This was him. I remained calm, but his trembling hands told me he was on edge. I asked him to step out of the vehicle. He refused, muttering that I had the wrong person. The moment I reached for my radio to call for backup, he slammed his foot on the gas. Tires screeched as he sped off. Adrenaline surged through me as I sprinted back to my cruiser, throwing it into gear and tearing after him. He led me down a winding back road away from the city. The route dead-ended near Oak Hill Cemetery, a place with looming iron gates and towering trees that cast eerie shadows under the dim streetlights. I expected to see his taillights up ahead, but when I rounded the bend, the road was empty. My gut tightened. Where had he gone? I slowed my car, scanning both sides of the road, my hands slick with sweat on the wheel. Even with my spotlight, I saw no movement. I stepped out of my cruiser, gun drawn, moving cautiously toward the cemetery gates. The silence was suffocating. No wind, no insects, just an oppressive, unnatural stillness. Then from the corner of my eye, I saw them. Headlights. A vehicle rolled toward me and I braced myself, thinking Warren had circled back. I shouted for the driver to stop. The car slowed, revealing a startled couple on their way home from a late dinner. They hadn't seen another vehicle or anyone on foot. They looked at me like I was insane. I let them go and returned to my search. That's when I saw it. Another car, barely visible behind an overgrown hedge. My breath hitched. As I inched closer, I saw the driver's door ajar. The seat was empty. Then movement in the cemetery. A figure, dressed in dark clothing, slipping between gravestones. My flashlight quivered slightly as I passed through the rusted gates, stepping into the graveyard. The tombstones jutted from the earth like jagged teeth. My radio crackled, backup still minutes away. Those minutes felt like an eternity. A rustling sound came from behind a large monument. I spun, breath caught in my throat. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, all dressed in black, their faces unreadable. They weren't ghosts, but they might as well have been. Then Warren took a slow, deliberate step forward. My pulse hammered in my ears as I took in the scene. 4 men surrounding me, their expressions unreadable in the dim light. I was alone, outnumbered, vulnerable. One of them, his voice sharp like a blade, barked out a command. "Drop your weapon!" My grip tightened around the handle, my mind racing. Should I fight? Could I even stand a chance? But reality crashed down. I was at their mercy. With a deep breath, I slowly lowered my gun to the ground, my fingers trembling as I raised my hands in surrender. Before I could react, they lunged. Rough hands grabbed at me, twisting my arms back with painful force. I stumbled as they shoved me down, my knees sinking into the cold, damp earth. The wetness seeped through my uniform, the chill wrapping around me like a vice. Their voices, barely above a whisper, slithered through the night. I could hear the tension in their hushed conversation, the uncertainty as they debated my fate. My breath hitched, my heartbeat a frantic drumbeat in my chest. Every second felt like an eternity, stretching out unbearably as my mind raced through every possible outcome. Then, a sound cut through the oppressive silence. Footsteps. Heavy. Measured. More figures moving in the darkness. My stomach twisted into a knot. Reinforcements? More of them? My muscles tensed, my body bracing for the worst. But then, a voice, clear, authoritative, and unmistakable, rang out over the cemetery. "Hands up! Police!" The world erupted into chaos. Red and blue lights pierced the night, casting eerie shadows against the tombstones. The men around me jolted, their heads snapping toward the flashing beacons of salvation and doom. For a split second, hesitation gripped them. Then, instinct took over. They scattered, their feet pounding against the ground as they attempted to flee. But they had waited too long. Officers surged in from every direction, their commands slicing through the air. One by one, the criminals were tackled, their weapons stripped away, their wrists bound in cold steel. I could hardly breathe as hands reached for me, cutting away my restraints. My limbs felt like lead, my body trembling from the adrenaline that still coursed through me like wildfire. Later, when the dust settled, the investigation unearthed a horrifying truth. Warren and his crew hadn't just been hiding stolen goods inside the decrepit crypt. They had turned the cemetery into their personal hideout, exploiting its eerie solitude. Open graves, disturbed and repurposed, had served as their hiding places, their escape routes, their twisted sanctuary. The thought of it sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through me. It felt unreal, like a macabre tale whispered in the dead of night, too grotesque to be real. But it was, and I had been at the center of it. That night changed something deep inside me. I had faced peril before, had stared down danger more times than I could count, but never like that. Never so alone, never so helpless. The darkness of that place, the cold breath of the unknown pressing against my skin. It lingered. It seeped into my bones, poisoning the job I had once loved. I couldn't shake it. I couldn't move past it. A few weeks later, I walked into the station for the last time. I set my badge down on the desk, my decision final. I had spent years patrolling those streets, but I could no longer walk them with the same resolve. The weight of knowing how quickly the world could turn against me, how thin the line between order and chaos truly was. I couldn't carry it anymore. I stepped out of that station and into the unknown, leaving behind a life that had once defined me, now overshadowed by a night I would never forget. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and I was 17 when this event unfolded. I had spent most of my life in Cedar Falls, Iowa, living in a modest two-story house on a quiet cul-de-sac, just a short drive from Lincoln High School, where I was a junior. School had been relentless lately, with finals looming ever closer. If you've ever experienced the pressure of exam season, you know how it can consume your thoughts day and night. That was exactly where my mind was when everything started. It was a Thursday afternoon when I got home, nerves already fraying over my upcoming history exam. The thought of failing gnawed at me, making it impossible to relax. To make matters worse, my parents were in the middle of packing for a trip to my uncle's wedding in a small town about 90 minutes away. They'd be gone for the entire weekend, leaving me alone for the first time in my life. I helped my mum load the last of their luggage into the trunk, double-checking that she hadn't left anything behind. She sensed my unease and gave me a reassuring hug, reminding me to call her if anything seemed off. I forced a smile, trying to appear composed, but deep down I was already on edge. As their car pulled away, a strange silence settled over the house, one I hadn't anticipated feeling so deeply. Usually, solitude was something I cherished, especially when I needed to concentrate. But that night, something about the emptiness felt different. Every noise, no matter how small, seemed amplified. The rhythmic ticking of the clock in the living room, the distant hum of the refrigerator, even the creaking of the old wooden floorboards beneath my feet. Trying to push aside my discomfort, I turned on the TV, hoping to drown out the stillness. After an hour, I grabbed my phone and texted my friend Zoe, a classmate who was also preparing for the history test. I asked if she wanted to come over and study. She quickly agreed, saying she'd arrive by 9 p.m. When Zoe showed up, the atmosphere shifted. Having someone else there made the house feel more normal again. We sprawled our textbooks across the coffee table, flipping through pages and quizzing each other. At around 10 p.m, she excused herself to use the bathroom upstairs in my room, where my mum always kept fresh towels. Not even 2 minutes later, Zoe hurried back downstairs, her face pale. She insisted that she had seen someone outside, sitting in one of the chairs on the back deck. I frowned, trying to dismiss it as a trick of the shadows, but she was adamant. My heart pounded as we both crept upstairs to my bedroom window, peering outside. The dim porch light barely illuminated the yard, and I scanned every inch carefully. The chair was empty. Everything was still. I suggested that maybe her eyes had played tricks on her, and though she didn't argue, she remained visibly shaken. The rest of the night passed without incident. Eventually, Zoe fell asleep in my room, and by morning, we brushed it off as nerves. She left later that day, and I went back to my routine, convinced the weirdness was behind me. But 2 nights later, something happened that changed everything. It was Saturday night. A storm rolled in, sending sheets of rain against the windows while wind howled through the trees. Zoe couldn't come over. Her dad was recovering from minor surgery, and she had to stay home. So, once again, I was alone. I tried to focus on my studies, but an uneasy feeling crept in, stronger than before. Then, through the sounds of the storm, I heard something distinct, a faint creaking, like someone shifting in a wooden chair outside. I froze. The sound came again, more deliberate this time. Slowly, I moved through the darkened house, turning off the lights as I went so I wouldn't be seen from outside. I reached my bedroom window and carefully parted the curtains. The porch light cast a weak glow over the backyard. And there, sitting in the exact same chair Zoe had pointed out, was a man. He sat motionless, barely illuminated by the rain-streaked light. My heart slammed against my ribs. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then, as if he sensed my gaze, he turned his head toward my window. I couldn't make out his features, but the way he tilted his head, as if he knew I was there, sent a cold wave of terror through me. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I debated calling my parents, the police, anyone. That's when a sudden knock at the front door made me nearly jump out of my skin. My breath caught. The rational part of me screamed not to open it, but then a voice, muffled by the rain, announced, "Police!" A second voice followed, this one familiar. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Hendricks. My mum had asked her to keep an eye on me while they were away. I rushed downstairs, peering through the peephole. There she was, standing with an officer on my porch. Relief flooded me as I unlocked the door and let them inside. Mrs. Hendricks explained that she had been in her attic when she spotted a figure sitting in my backyard. She had called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, the man was gone. They searched the property but found no trace of him. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, just an empty, rain-soaked chair. The officer advised me not to stay in the house alone. Mrs. Hendricks insisted I pack a bag and sleep at her place for the remainder of the weekend. I didn't hesitate. Before leaving, I took one last look out the back window, half expecting to see the figure again. But there was nothing, just the empty chair, glistening in the rain. That night, I lay awake in Mrs. Hendricks's guest room, still shaken. When my parents returned on Monday, I told them everything. I never spent another night alone in that house until I moved away for college. And even though nothing ever physically happened to me, the fear that night instilled in me never fully faded.